new definitions based on the universal and unchanging laws of nature, like the speed of light and the movement of atoms. Le Grand K is in fact the only artifact that is still in use, a measurement dinosaur.
Today, here at the BIPM, they're still making clones of that Grand K. Fabrice here is polishing this until it exactly matches the mass of the Grand K sitting in the vault downstairs.
Over half the countries in the world have one of these clones.
The next one he's working on is clone number 103 that's going to go to, well, we're actually not allowed to know where it's going to go.
At Le Grand K, our entire global system of mass and weight measurement would crumble.
Unfortunately, crumble is a little bit of a touchy word inside this building, because that's what's happening to Le Grand K. I mean, it's not literally crumbling, but despite the kid-glove treatment it's received over the last 150 years, it's believed that it's changed by the equivalent of 1 grain of sand during its lifetime.
And that's bad news, because it no longer matches the weight of the world's clones. A new way to define mass is urgently needed.
Now the race is on to replace the definition of the kilo with something more fitting for the 21st century, something based on a universal constant that can be measured wherever you are in the universe. We've done it for length, that's now tied to the speed of light. For time, that's related to the movement of electrons in the atom. Now we want to do it for the kilo.
It's a head-to-head race between 2 international teams, each one taking a radically different approach to solving the kilo crisis. In America, Team Watt Balance are combining the power of electricity with scales whose principles date back 5,000 years. Their dream? To redefine the kilo based on energy. 6,000 kilometers away in Germany, Team Silicon Sphere are trying to count every single atom in a perfect ball of silicon. It's an immense task, like covering the Earth in sand and trying to count every single granule. As the best minds in measurement science fight it out, Le Grand K's long and illustrious career could soon be over, but its legacy has been staggering. From the moment it was adopted, the movement and sale of goods became much easier and more efficient. The scientific community jumped on the new metric system, loving its simplicity and the ease they could split or multiply the meter and the kilogram by 10. But from the very beginning of its life in the 18th century, the public remained less convinced.
People were just not interested in revolutionizing their everyday life, what they did when they went shopping, how they exchanged and bought in the name of revolutionary purity.
The kilo continues to divide opinion. In the UK, it was only adopted in the 1960s, and its arrival was met with outright hostility.
All we ask is the freedom of choice to record in the native and still legal measures of this country instead of these cockeyed kilograms which make no sense at all.
But despite the opposition, today all but 3 nations, the United States, Liberia and Myanmar, have embraced the kilo and the metric system. While the world was moving towards a unified weight measurement system, The actual technology of weighing was now lagging behind. Variations on ancient Mesopotamian and Egyptian beam balances remained our scales of choice right up to the 19th century. The problem was, they took so long to use. In the UK, weighing was made much worse by the Turnpike Act of 1752. Eager to tax the movement of goods, the government ordered all towns to erect a crane machine or engine for the weighing carts and wagons. At each location, carts had to be unloaded, weighed, reloaded, and weighed once again. And to add to the daily misery, every key road demanded tolls too, all payable on the weight you were carrying. With the Industrial Revolution, things had to change. Factories to forges now needed raw materials in unprecedented quantities, and they had to be weighed, bought and transported with ever-increasing speed and precision. A faster, more efficient means of weighing was desperately needed. The solution was the weighbridge. A technological triumph, the weighbridge, with its balance scale hidden beneath the floor, would play a key role in driving our industrial revolution onwards. Now, loads could be weighed in seconds as they rolled on and off the bridge. But it would take electricity to drive the next big breakthrough in weighing. Inventor Charles Wheatstone championed the use of electricity in the 1840s. Experimenting with simple electrical circuits, he devised a way of measuring electrical resistance. But it wasn't until a century later that people realised this very same technology could be used to measure weight. Today, the need for speedy mass measurement drives our world. This train is delivering coal to Rugeley Power Station, and as it runs over the track, it's being weighed by load cells which are underneath the track. If we come in here, we can see how much we've weighed so far. So hi Andy. Hi. So this is the first carriage that's over, so we've got 100 tons. Yeah. They're much more efficient than sort of weighing it all by hand.
Oh yeah, very much so, yeah. So we can measure at 70 kilometres an hour, so you're talking less than a second per wagon probably.
Oh, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
So how's this piece of track actually weighing the train? Well, underneath the track are several of these. They're called load cells. And actually, it's this little system of wires on the rod which is doing the weighing. But as soon as something runs over the track, it compresses the rod and the wires get shorter and fatter. The resistance goes down and I get more electrical current running through it. And suddenly I'm getting a reading. What's amazing is that there's a direct mathematical relationship between the increase in electrical current and the weight going over the wires. So we're using the electricity to weigh the train. In fact, this thing is so sensitive that even if I step on it, I actually can get how much I weigh. So let's see. So how much do I weigh, Andy?
84.
84 kilos?
Yeah.
I don't weigh 84 kilos. Must be the weight of this. Today, load cells are used the world over. We've come a long way since the days of the beam balance. Now everywhere, from roadside weigh stations to supermarket checkouts use them. Measuring mass with electricity has changed our world. We can now weigh, transport, and deliver billions of tons worth of produce with a speed and accuracy our Victorian forefathers would never have dreamt possible. precision mass measurement is key to world commerce. Now, it's the turn of the very small to push the limits of mass measurement. Here in America, I've come to meet a team who've come up with a unique approach to measuring some of the smallest living things on Earth. Cells. Project leader Scott Manalis is using mass to monitor the growth of cells. His work could one day revolutionize our fight against cancer. In his lab, he has built the world's smallest weighing station. Here, inside a microchip just millimeters in size, cells are captured and passed over a sensor. The long, thin section, highlighted here, acts a bit like a diving board. When a cell passes over it, it vibrates, just like a diving board moves after a diver jumps off it. The speed of the vibration is directly linked to the weight of the cell. So using simple maths, Scott can measure the cell with incredible accuracy.
This cell is equivalent to like a white blood cell in terms of its size.
Okay.
And it weighs 100 picograms. So
Picograms, so that's 10
to the minus 12.
Oh, right, okay, so 0.
Lot of zeros.
Lot of zeros.
Lot of zeros
So this is
that
an
go.
incredibly small thing.
So the cell doesn't weigh very much.
Yeah.
And the precision at which we can weigh it with is 4 orders of magnitude below that.
Wow, that's incredible.
So that's 10 femtograms. So femto now takes us from minus 12
in
to minus
1,000
to 15.
Right.
1 part in 10,000.
10,000.
0.01%.
Yeah.
We care a lot about these things.
Yeah, no. We're soon in the domain of extreme numbers. But what's amazing is Scott's measuring the weight of a single cell to within 1,000 trillionth of a gram. His work is revolutionizing our understanding of how cells grow. And by measuring how cells respond to a drug, it could lead to personalized and far more effective cancer treatment. It's absolutely amazing the limits we are now pushing mass measurement. But scientists are frustrated. And it's because we're still trying to tie mass back to that aging lump of metal in Paris, Le Grand K. And with Le Grand K's weight unstable, there's a real urgency to find a new, even more accurate way to define mass. Now, a race is being fought across 2 continents to retire Le Grand K. "20 miles north of Washington is one of the world's most accurate set of scales.
This whole area is a car-free zone, and that's because the scales that are being used here are so sensitive that even the magnetic field caused by the metal inside the cars can affect the measurements. Welcome to Team Watt Balance.
Most things in this strange-looking building are made of wood and clad in vinyl to minimize the effects of magnetism. Everything from the power lines to the plumbing pipes are encased in shielded plastic ducts. And every single bit of metal that enters the lab, down to this tiny spare part, has to be checked for levels of magnetism. Stefan Schlamminger's project is one of the longest-running metrology experiments in the world. Its founders have long since retired, but now the team here are close to fulfilling their dream. And this is their brainchild, the Watt Balance. In gauge of pure copper is a weighing scale whose principles go back to the very first balances 5,000 years ago. And it's so sensitive, it can measure the kilo to 8 decimal places.
So here's our watt balance.
It is a thing of beauty. Wow.
It really is. And you see up here, this wheel is like the beam in an old-fashioned beam balance.
But that's quite ancient technology, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 1,000-year-old technology up on top, but down here you will see the coil that's connected to these 3 rods, and this will provide counter force to the gravitational force that this mass is providing.
On one side of the scales, deep inside the mechanism, sits a clone of the Legrand K. What's so extraordinary about this device is that on the other side, instead of a weight, the team are using electrical force to counterbalance it.
The watt balance defines the kilogram by linking mechanical power to electrical power. That's why it's called the watt balance.
Right.
Their goal is to measure the amount of electricity needed to perfectly counterbalance the kilo clone and redefine the kilogram based on electrical power. It sounds straightforward, but when you are working with one of the most sensitive scales in the world, everything from car engines to movement of the local deer population outside can affect its readings. Even tiny shifts in gravity, like the phase of the moon and the level of groundwater, need to be measured and taken into account when this experiment is running.
It seems you're having to keep track of so many different things in order to pin down that kilo.
That is the art.
That's the art and the science of this. So that's amazing.
So we try to measure this kilo to about 4 parts per 100 million. And in order to do so, we need to measure all these auxiliary quantities like voltage, resistance, gravity, meter, second, to much better than 4 parts per 100 million.
After more than 30 years of perfecting the scale's accuracy, Team Watt Balance are very close to achieving their holy grail, a new electronic kilogram. I left the Watt Balance team realizing I was witnessing a potentially historic moment in the life of the kilogram.
The days of the American kilo making its transatlantic journey to Paris to be compared against Legrand K are probably numbered. But the Watt Balance team have got a rival. In Germany, Team Silicon Sphere have got a completely different approach to refining the kilo, and it involves counting the number of atoms in a kilogram of silicon crystal. People often talk about counting the number of grains of sand on a beach, but what Team Silicon Sphere are proposing to do is in a completely different league. It's like trying to cover the whole globe in sand and counting every grain.
But what are these atoms they're trying to count? It was the ancient Greeks who first came up with the word atom to define the smallest indivisible particle of matter. But it took Englishman John Dalton in the 19th century to shed light on what atoms really are. At the time, we knew that all matter was made up of different elements, like carbon and oxygen. Dalton's brilliance was a radical theory that each element must consist of atoms of a single unique type and mass. Dalton would never have dreamt it possible to see or count these atoms. But now, in a remote lab in northern Germany, scientists are attempting to do just that. What Dalton didn't realise is the sheer number of atoms inside things. That there are trillion upon trillion inside a single kilo of silicon. And it's by counting these atoms that the silicon sphere team hoped to redefine the kilo. This is a perfect kilogram sphere of pure silicon. The culmination of 30 years' work. It represents one of the most ambitious challenges ever to be taken in measurement history. Like the watt balance, the silicon sphere project started in the 1970s.
The goal was to measure the atomic distances, also the distance between the atoms in a very perfect crystal. Silicon was at that time a material which was used for the semiconductor industry and was the first very perfect material for that use.
Silicon atoms line up in an extremely rigid and regular pattern, which in theory makes them easy to count. The idea was to create a perfect sphere of silicon, measure its dimensions with extreme precision, and then calculate the spaces between the atoms using a technique called X-ray crystallography. Then, using simple maths, they could work out the total number of atoms in the sphere. The project was supposed to take a couple of years, but they faced many challenges. The first was how to create a perfect sphere. The levels of perfection the team was seeking were beyond the capabilities of any machine. They scoured the globe and found the only way to create a sphere to the level of perfection they needed was to do it by hand. And only one man was capable of this: Australian lensmaker Achim Leisner. He literally used his hands to shape the ball to such an incredible level of perfection that if you likened it to the Earth, the level of its surface would never vary more than a few meters. Using his extraordinary sense of touch, it's said Achim could feel silicon's atomic structure with his fingertips.
You need really a feeling how many atoms you have to remove on that side or on the other side of the sphere. So he had an atomic feeling in his hands.
It took months for Achim to perfect his sphere. Finally, the task of analysing the space between the silicon atoms could begin. But on the cusp of realising their dream, disaster struck. There was a flaw in the very makeup of the silicon. In its natural state, silicon consists of 3 different forms called isotopes. Now, each different atom has a different mass. Leisner's sphere contained all 3 different types of these atoms. The team needed a pure source of silicon, or else the project was over. The solution came from an unlikely source. A nuclear weapons facility.
The Cold War was over and a lot of centrifuge in Russia were not running for nuclear weapons. So we were lucky to rent some of this centrifuge to prepare silicon for our purpose.
A new batch of silicon was sent to Russia and spun in the same centrifuge that was formerly used to enrich uranium. This forced out the wayward extra isotopes, producing pure silicon-28. Then Leisner had to start the job of polishing all over again. Finally, after many years, the scientists